Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this Waterstones virtual event with the wonderful Katherine Rundell, who will be talking about her new book, Impossible Creatures, which is currently Waterstones Book of the Year. Impossible Creatures is an absolutely fantastic story about two children, Mal and Christopher, who are trying to save some impossible creatures from extinction. But you'll hear more about that from Katherine in a moment. As always, we have a lovely list of pre-submitted questions. So after Katherine has finished her presentation, we'll be going through some of them, but please, any questions that arise, if you pop them in the chat box and we'll try and get to as many as we can. This session is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss any of it, you'll be emailed a link to review it again tomorrow. And we'd love to see any pictures of you enjoying the event. Please share them on social media using hashtag Waterstones virtual events. We also have some schools joining us from all around the world, which is absolutely incredible. So thank you to everyone for tuning in today. I'll be back at the end to do the Q&A. And without further ado, Katherine, over to you.
Hello, this is such a delight. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am going to share my screen so that I can show you some slides. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about where ideas come from. So this is, I think, one of the questions that I get asked most. Where do your ideas come from? How do you put them down on paper? What are stories made of? And it's one of my favorite questions. And the answer, of course, is from everywhere, from things you see, from things you read, from things you hear on the bus, from dreams, from things that just flash into your brain. But for me, often, my ideas come from the real world. I'm going to start, first of all, by talking about the books that I've been writing for the last 15 years, which are books set in the real world. And then I'm going to talk about how you try and take that realness and you put it into a fantasy book, into my newest book, Impossible Creatures. So I wrote a book called The Explorer, about 4 children who crash land in the Amazon rainforest. And to write that book, I went to the Amazon rainforest. And this is a picture of one of the tributaries of the Amazon River. And I think it looks so beautiful and so peaceful. But in fact, there was so much that was under the water that was alive and astonishing. For instance, there are dolphins in the Amazon River. And I'm sure many of you were much smarter than me, so you knew this, but I did not know until I got there that the dolphins in the Amazon River are pink. And not just a little bit pink, really, really vividly pink. And in fact, in this photograph, I am completely soaked to the skin. And the reason that I'm so wet is that a few minutes before that photograph was taken, a pod of 5 pink wild river dolphins came swimming straight under the boat. And even though I was wearing all my clothes, I just pulled off my boots and dived in after them. And it meant that I lost all the money that I had in my pockets, but it didn't matter. It was worth it because they were maybe this far away. And you could see that they had scars on their backs where they got into fight with caiman, which are a kind of alligator, and these very beautiful, trusting eyes. But there were other things in the water as well, which were less beautiful. We were told that it was safe to swim in the Amazon, even though it was full of piranhas, because the speed of the current would be too fast and they wouldn't know how to bite us. And I don't know about you, but I think that that is gambling a lot on the stupidity of a fish. Because what if one of them was so clever it did know how to bite us? What if there was like an Einstein of piranhas? But as you can see, I was not eaten by piranhas, otherwise I wouldn't be here in my little flat in London. So in fact, instead of being eaten by piranhas, we ate the piranhas. And piranhas are actually quite delicious. They taste a little bit like chicken, and they are very, very easy to catch because they're so greedy. And in fact, you just need a very, very basic little hook, and you catch them, you kill them, and you put them in the bottom of the boat. And our guide bent down to pick one, and it wasn't fully dead yet, and it bit the entire tip off his finger. But he was very, very cool about it. He was one of the coolest men I'd ever seen. He had been born in the Amazon rainforest in an indigenous group. And then he had gone on to become a nurse and a motorcycle mechanic. So he knew how to fix things. So he made himself a bandage out of leaves and twine. And then he ate the piranha which had eaten him, that one at the bottom. If you think about it, that is technically cannibalism. But I think it's probably okay if it's your own finger, I hope. But there was a reason that I wanted to eat the piranhas. It wasn't just that I was hungry, although it was partly that. It was also that I think food is one of the best ways of making a story feel real. And so if ever any of you are writing a story in class or for fun, a good tip is to put food into your story. Because if you make the food sound delicious, then the person reading the book feels physically hungry. So what you've done is you've rooted the imaginary world of the story into the real physical world of their stomach, of their body. And the same works for really disgusting food. And so I always said, I would promise children that absolutely every book I wrote, I had always eaten the food that was in the stories. So in a book called Rooftoppers, they eat tomato soup up on the rooftop, and that's just a real recipe for tomato soup. The only thing where this wasn't real was the tarantulas in the Explorer. The 4 children eat tarantulas in the rainforest. And while I was in the rainforest, we were shown how to catch them, but I just couldn't quite bring myself to eat them. So I thought, I'll just imagine it. I'll just talk to the children in the Amazon rainforest and ask them. And they said, tarantulas are quite delicious and they taste a little bit like prawns. So I thought, okay, I'll put that in the book. So if you read The Explorer, there's a scene where the 4 children eat tarantulas and they find them delicious. But then what happened was the book won a prize, the Costa, which was wonderful. But it meant suddenly it was selling far more copies. And I started panicking and thinking, what if it's not true? What if I've accidentally created fake news? So I thought, there's an easy solution to this. I'll just eat a tarantula. So I found a tarantula on the internet. You can buy them in cans. So it came in a tin and they come with their legs curled up. So you sort of have to uncurl them and put them on your hand. And in fact, there's a video of this if you want to watch it on YouTube. And the thing you discover when you have a tarantula in your hand is that they have faces that look like they know your secrets and they judge you for them. So I ate the face, and it turned out that the children in the Amazon had maybe lied to me, because that tarantula did not taste delicious and it did not taste like prawns. It tasted, I don't know if any of you with longer hair have ever set fire to your hair. That smell that you get, it tasted like that smell. And so I thought, okay, am I going to change the story? And then I thought, well, it's not a very good experiment, actually, because tinned tarantulas are different from fresh tarantulas in the way that tinned peaches are different from fresh peaches. So maybe fresh tarantulas actually are delicious, but I'm not sure I want to eat another tarantula. So if any of you have eaten tarantulas, or if you want to eat a tarantula, if you could do that and let me know by email, that would be marvelous. So that's one way that you go about finding stories. You go to the Amazon rainforest and you walk through the trees and you take notes in a notebook and you eat and you smell and you try to make it real. But then ideas come in other ways too. Sometimes they come at you totally without warning. For instance, I wrote a book called Rooftoppers about children who live up on the rooftops of Paris. And that book idea came while I was on a rooftop. I have another job, which is that I teach Shakespeare at Oxford University. And this was my college, All Souls College. And when I got there, I was told there was a secret trapdoor above the library. And through it, you could get up onto one of the towers. And from there, you could get up onto the rooftop. And it was one night and we were running around on the rooftop. And while I was up there, I found an empty glass bottle of beer. And I thought, how could this have got up here? It couldn't have blown up here because it's glass, so it can't have blown up in a storm. And I thought, what if somebody has been living up here and we don't know because we always forget to look up? What if actually there are secret lives up on the rooftops of Oxford? And then I asked around and I found the incredibly boring answer, which was that somebody had come to fix some of the tiles on the rooftop 3 years before, and they had brought a picnic and they had brought some beer with them and they'd forgotten to take it back down. So that was very, very dull. But it began a what if. And I think if you think about it, every single story has a what if at the heart of it, a question that is the engine of the story, that powers it like an engine powers a car and drives it forward. What if, what if you were a wizard with a scar on your forehead and you had to defeat another evil wizard who in the film version doesn't have a nose for some reason? Or what if you went through a wardrobe and on the other side there was a lion and a witch and snow? What then? And so I started thinking about this what if. What if children lived up on the rooftops of Paris? And what if they jumped from rooftop to rooftop? And what if when it was too far, they stretched a tightrope between the rooftops to walk between them? And I started telling a few people this. And some of them said, well, sure, but that wouldn't really happen. It's very unlikely. And the thing is, I think you should never let anyone tell you that your stories are too unlikely. Because no matter how wild and unlikely your stories are, there will always be something as wild and unlikely in the real world, even if your story is about unicorns and dragons, because the real world is a magical and unlikely place. So although Rooftoppers is not a true story, and there are no children, walking a tightrope between the Arc de Triomphe and the Palais de Justice, that's not real. But this really did happen. This is a picture of a man called Philippe Petit. And in 1977, he climbed to the top of one of the World Trade Center buildings, which at the time were the tallest buildings in the world. They were the buildings that were hit on September the 11th. They were half a kilometer high. And he stood with his toes right on the edge of the building. And he fired a bow and arrow to the opposite building. And on the bow and arrow, there was fishing twine. And on the fishing twine, there was rope. And on the rope, there was wire. And a man at the other side pulled it taut. And as the sun came up over New York City, without a harness or a parachute or anything at all, he stepped off onto that wire. And a wire is about this wide, about 1.5 centimeters. So if he'd gone a millimeter wrong each side, he could have died. But he didn't. And for 45 minutes, he walked backwards and forwards on that wire. And as the sun came up, he put down his balancing pole on the wire. And he knelt down on the wire. And he reached up and he saluted the birds. And then he lay down on his back and he waved his arms and legs like he was dancing. And he sang to the pigeons that were swimming overhead. And that is why you should never let anyone tell you that your stories are impossible, because the real world is full of impossible things. And oh yes, I got a little bit obsessed with this, and I put a tightrope between 2 trees when I was very young, about 7 or 8, and I walked backwards and forwards on those trees and on the wire, and I fell off over and over and over again, and I've broken every single one of my toes, some of them many, many times, so I have very, very weird looking feet. But if you do something for long enough, you can usually learn to be okay at it. So in my study, I had a practice wire very low to the ground. And every morning I would walk backwards and backwards and forwards on that wire. Sometimes in point shoes, sometimes in high-heeled shoes, sometimes blindfold. And it's, in terms of being useful, it is not a useful skill, but it does something. No one has ever said, you know, Katherine Rundell, quick, come, we have a unexpectedly niche tightrope-based emergency. That's never happened. But when you walk a wire, the rest of the world vanishes. And you can only hear the blood in your ears, and you can only feel the wire. And sometimes I think it is wonderful to have the rest of the world vanish, because the world is a loud and chaotic place. And for me, the only other thing that has ever done that, apart from walking the tightrope, is reading. I don't know if you guys know this feeling, do you? When sometimes you're reading a book and it's so exciting and so engrossing that the rest of the world just vanishes and you almost forget who you are, you almost forget where you are. That is one of my favorite feelings. And if you haven't had it yet, it's just because you haven't found the right book yet. And it is worth hunting for that book, because it is like finding buried treasure when you find that book. And I knew that what I wanted to do when I became a writer was try to make books that, for some people, not everyone, you can't please everyone, but some people would be that kind of book. And so with Impossible Creatures, I thought, right, this is my chance with fantasy to write something huge and exciting and sweeping. And this is, I think, my favorite book of all the books I've written. This is the one I loved writing most and the one I love most, because this is the one that has the thing I love, which is magical, mythical creatures. And the what if, the question that powers Impossible Creatures is this: what if there was a cluster of islands in the North Atlantic Ocean, hidden from us by magic, but in our world, and on them, every single creature of myth that humanity has ever heard of is real and alive and thriving, and you can get there if you know the way. And this is what the islands look like. And some of them are big and some of them are tiny. Some of them are barely as large as 3 swimming pools put together. Some of them are as large as Denmark. And there you will find all the creatures of myth, both the ones that we know about, like unicorns and dragons and centaurs, but also I spent about 300 hours in the archives reading about the mythical creatures that we used to know about and have sort of forgotten, like El Mirages, which are horned golden hares that you find in 12th century Persian manuscripts. And I thought, okay, how do I make this story as real as possible? And I thought, well, I want to have in this story a girl with a coat that allows her to fly, but only when the wind blows. And I thought, okay, that means that she can soar up over treetops and down over unicorn herds, but when the wind stops, she has to work out a way to get down fast so she doesn't, break her neck. And I thought, how can I make that real? I thought, well, I don't know what it's like to fly with a flying coat, but I do know a little bit about flight, because I come from a family of pilots. Both my grandfathers flew Spitfires in the Second World War, and for the last while, I've been learning to fly this tiny little aeroplane, a Piper Cub with a tiny engine, smaller than a car engine, in Zimbabwe. And I thought, so yes, you can see it's a very ramshackle old aeroplane. It's much, much older than I am. And where the holes have been drilled for the nuts and bolts to go through, sometimes there are gaps. And so the air rushes through the cockpit. So you have to tie your hair back and wear big earphones. But it means that if you fly through clouds, you can taste them, because the air comes into the cockpit and different clouds taste different. Grey clouds taste different from white clouds. And I thought I could put that into the story. So when Mal flies through clouds, that Mal is the girl, she tastes them and she calls it cloud eating. And I thought, okay, that might make it more real. And then I thought, what else do we know about flight? And I thought, well, I wrote another book called The Good Thieves. And for that, one of the characters is a trapeze artist. So I went to learn the trapeze. And the thing you learn about the trapeze is, I think, would be similar to learning how to fly with a flying coat. It's very, very difficult and very, very painful. It is wonderful and exciting with the flying trapeze when you, just as you catch your catcher's hands and you let go with your knees, it does feel a bit like flying. But also, I was not very good at it, and I was over ambitious. And I tried to do a thing called a triple backflip dismount, and I did it very badly. And I landed in the net and scraped half the skin off one bit of my cheek. And I thought, I could put that in the book, because I think learning to fly with a flying coat would be painful. And on the same day, I saw this young woman, a very brilliant young woman. She was very talented at the flying trapeze, but she landed badly and her hand got caught in the net. And as she sat up, her little finger had bent all the way back to her wrist. And she went quite green. And I thought, oh, I could steal that as well. She was fine, by the way. She was absolutely fine, and she was able to fly on the flying trapeze again. But if you read Impossible Creatures, you will spot a tiny reference to a moment where Mal bends her little finger all the way back to the wrist. And you'll know that what I'm doing is stealing from the real world and giving it a twist and making it bigger and making it fiction. And through the whole book, that's what I've been doing. So for instance, some of the creatures that I knew I wanted to have. I knew I wanted a dog called a Claude, a dog the size of a bear. And it has ears that are flames. And it's said to look like the most frightening wolf-like creature. And it doesn't look you in the eye. And its favorite thing to do is eat children head first. You find them in Germany and in Northern Europe in the 18th century. And I thought, okay, obviously I don't know anything about what it would be like to meet a mythical fiery-eared dog. But I do know what it would be like to meet a wolf. Because for my book, The Wolf Wilder, I went to meet a wolf. And wolves are very different from dogs. They are so beautiful and so wild. And this one was half tame, but even then you weren't allowed to stroke her if you bite your fingernails, because you might have little bits of blood by the edge of your fingers, and the smell of blood might make her anxious and she might snap your fingers off. And I actually do bite my fingernails, but I'd come so far that I thought I would risk it. And as you can see, she did not bite my fingers. But she was beautiful, and she smelt of dust and ice and blood, and she wouldn't look you in the eye. And I took a little bit of her strangeness and her beauty and the rasping noise she makes as she breathes, and I put that into the moment where the boy, the hero of the book, a boy called Christopher, meets a Clud. So again, you steal from the real world and you make it twisty and fictional, and you put it in your story. And then I knew, of course, I also wanted griffins. Griffins, I think, are one of my favorite mythical creatures, and they are part lion, part eagle. And I thought, okay, how do we make this as real as possible? Mine is a tiny baby griffin. And I thought, okay, so we're going to put some tiny baby lion in there. And I was very lucky when I grew up in Zimbabwe. I used to get to spend quite a lot of time with lion cubs, because there was a place nearby where lions who had been bought as pets, which is a terrible idea, were taken and made wild again. It was called lion feral-ing. It's where the idea of the wolf wilder came from. And so I would spend some time sometimes with these tiny little lion cubs, and they would pounce on things like moths and leaves. So my griffin pounces on things like moths and leaves. And then I thought, okay, I also want some eagle in my mythical creature. And so a tiny baby eagle, because its head is an eagle. And eagles have eyesight that is 8 times better than human eyesight. So my tiny griffin can see things long before adult humans can see them. But then I thought, I also want, griffins are supposed to be one of the wisest mythical creatures in the world. And I thought, okay, how do we make it wise? Well, you pick the wisest bird and you put some of those characteristics into the griffin. But the wisest bird is not the eagle. I don't know if you guys were to think for a second about what you think it is. A lot of people would say the owl, but it's actually the crow. And this is a picture of a crow who has been trained to pick up litter. and fly it to the nearest dustbin in an amusement park in France. But they've been trained to do it in front of the person who dropped the litter. So you are being publicly shamed by a crow. And I thought, right, I'm definitely putting that in the story. And then I read this incredible story about a little girl in Seattle who befriended the crows, and she started giving them bread and peanut butter. And over a period of years, it took about 4 years, they started bringing her gifts, little bits of glass and paper clips and silvery things. And I thought, I'm going to put that in the story too. So there is a moment when the little griffin, whose name is Gelifen, he plucks a feather from his own wings and gives it to Christopher, the hero, to use as a toothpick because they don't have any toothbrushes. Because I thought that's the kind of thing that crows might do. And then, of course, I knew that I wanted a unicorn because I love unicorns. And of course, the question, what's the closest thing to a unicorn? Obviously, the answer would be, I guess, a horse. And I used to spend a lot of time riding horses when I was young. This was a horse called Asterix that I used to ride when I was little in Zimbabwe. It was a very, very friendly horse and much, much too tall for me. I don't know why I was put on such a big horse. I think they didn't have any little ones. But then I also thought, there's something else that's like a unicorn. And it's a narwhal. And narwhals used to be called the unicorn of the sea. And we believed that they were magic. And we believed that their horns could repel poison. And we believed that they could save people's lives. And I thought, that is amazing. That we have in real life, even though their horns do not have magical properties, their horns are so sensitive that sometimes narwhals meet in the ocean and they clash their horns together. And we used to think they were fighting. But in fact, what they're doing is exchanging information about the ocean through which they have both just swum, because the salt quality of the ocean is still on the horn. And so they're crossing horns to tell each other about the saltiness of the ocean they have both just swum through when they meet. So their horns in some ways are magical. And so we do have our own kind of real unicorn swimming in the sea around us. But then I knew I also wanted this. I wanted terrifying unicorns. This is a karkadan, and they come, you find them in southern Europe and in the Middle East in around the 16th century, and they are purplish black and they have yellow teeth and yellow horns, and their horns are they have poison on the end, and they also love to eat people, especially children. And you know that question, what if? One of the what ifs I wanted was, what if you were cornered by a horde of karkadans coming chasing towards you? What would you do then? How would you fight? What would you do? I wanted these big, huge adventure moments because I love battles and I love danger and I love peril. And I thought that would be exciting. And then finally, I wanted a little kanko. A kanko, you find them in Japanese mythology, and they are about this big, foxes with 2 tails. And in some versions, they are mischievous, and in some versions, they're wicked. And I thought that I wanted mine, and some versions, they're lucky. And I wanted mine to be lucky and mischievous. And if they come and nest near you, that's great luck. So if a kanko comes and nests in your shoe, you mustn't disturb it because it's the best luck for your day, but it does mean you can't wear your shoes that day. And in the book, there's a man on the day he's about to get married, a kanko comes and nests in his beard in his sleep, and he just has to get married with the kanko. And if they lick you, their saliva is luminescent, glow in the dark. So if they lick you on the wrist, your wrist will glow in the dark for the next few days. And so those are some of the creatures that went into making the story. And I loved reading about them and researching them. And the what if at the heart of it is, what if all these miraculous, wonderful, exciting, terrifying creatures were dying? And what if no one knew why they were perishing? And what if the only person who could save them was you? What would you do in order to save this beautiful, endangered place? And that is the story of Impossible Creatures. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen And I think we're going to have about 15 minutes of your questions, because I am so thrilled that we've had so many sent in, and I can't wait to hear them.
Hello. Thank you for that absolutely fascinating presentation. I love that about the shaming crow. So clever. So yeah, we've got lots of lovely questions pre-submitted, and I can see a lot kind of flooding the chat, so I'll do a mixture of both. We have quite a lot of questions, I think, from kind of budding authors, so I'll do some about the kind of writing process. So we have one which is, sorry, I've just lost it again. From Wandsworth Prep in London, how do you approach the process of improving your first draft?
Okay, that is a brilliant question. And I think it's quite a complicated one. The most important thing with your first draft is to get it down on paper. And one of the things that people who want to be writers often forget is that you can always make bad writing into good writing, but no writing remains no writing. So the first step of being a writer is to get your first draft all the way to the end. Don't stop halfway. Get right to the end of your story. Don't give up. Just keep going. And then you have your first draft. And then what you do is you go back and you read it out loud. And then you can hear if you've repeated the same word in the same paragraph 3 times, perhaps. Or even better, you get someone else to read it out loud. And that really helps you. Hearing it in a strange voice, not the voice in your head, really helps pinpoint exactly where you're going wrong. And then you just realize that the most important bit of writing is the editing. It is often the hardest bit. It's not my favorite bit. I love writing the first draft. I don't love the editing. But the editing is where you are shining what you have. It's like what you have is a rock and you are shining it into a diamond, or like what your first draft is a big mound of sand and the editing is making it into a proper sandcastle. And so you just read it over and over, and every time it sounds wrong, you go back and you think of a better word.
Excellent. We have another question which is about writer's block, which is from Woodland Primary School in Skelmersdale. And they say, what do you do when you get writer's block, if you do get writer's block?
So the thing I do if I get writer's block is, first of all, if I'm stuck at my page writing and I just can't get anything on the paper, sometimes I get up and I go for a walk and I try and look at something, a painting or a view, because that can sometimes shift something in your head. But the other thing is, like I said earlier, you make yourself write badly. If you've got writer's block, say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a whole page of nonsense. And I don't need to use any of it. And I'm just going to write what comes into my head first thing. And it doesn't have to be good, but it's going to be words. And sometimes in doing that, what will happen is it will spark an idea. And even if you use none of the words and the words are just, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. Maybe I should write about tiny elves that come out of your nose when you blow your nose. Even if you're writing nonsense, sometimes a tiny spark will flicker and it can become the next real idea.
Amazing. I do like tiny elves that come out of your nose. We have a question which is from the Dragon School in Oxford, amazing name, who ask, why do you often mix comedy and dangerous situations in your writing?
So I have always loved books with good jokes. And I think one of the ways that you know you're going to be in good hands when I'm reading a book, if there are good jokes, I feel cherished. I feel like people have paid attention to what I want, because what I want is jokes. But then I also want danger and excitement and big stakes, so that if it goes wrong, it matters. And I think you need both. You need stories that feel like they matter, where you really care what happens. But then you also need jokes, because jokes, I think, are one of the ways we are at our most human. And the people I love most tend to be people who love jokes. And so I want to put jokes into my stories for them.
Yeah, it does really lift a story, because doesn't it? It makes the serious moments feel more serious, but then Lightens them up.
Exactly. And then you get the contrast.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We've had a lot of questions, so I can't pick out a specific person who asked this. But can you talk a bit about who some of your favourite authors growing up were and books that inspired you?
Yes. Oh, wonderful. So I adored the Narnia books. I read them over and over and over again. And you know, when you read something over and over, you sort of, I think it's almost like you're eating the book and it gets into your blood and into your skin. So I sort of think that, you know, there's Narnia in my hair and in my fingernails now. And then there was another writer who I adored, who was a little bit less well known, called Diana Wynne Jones. And some of you will have heard of her and some of you won't, but she is brilliant. She wrote a book called Charmed Life and a book called Howl's Moving Castle, which was made into a big movie. And she is funny and sarcastic and ironic, and her books are full of wizards and magic. And if you're looking for something just delicious, I would say read Charmed Life.
Absolutely. Would also back that recommendation. We have a lovely question from the OWL class at St Nicholas School who asks, what feeling do you get when you publish a book?
Ah, what a lovely question. So what happens with a book is the same thing, I think, that happens with any piece of writing that you spend a lot of time with. Say you're a person who writes stories for fun. When you're writing it, you go between loving it and hating it and thinking it's a disaster and then loving it again and then really hating it. And the thing that you get when finally the book is finished is this sense of joyful relief and a little bit a sense like you've just pulled off a heist. Sometimes it feels like almost like I go into bookshelf shops and I see my book and I think, can't quite believe that something I just sat in my pajamas dreaming up is now physical. It exists in the world. So it is very truly one of the best feelings there is.
Wonderful. We have a question from Scarcroft Primary who asks, what is your favourite sentence that you've ever written?
Ooh, nice.
Question.
Oh, I like that. Ooh. I quite like, so I love writing first sentences. Those have always mattered to me a lot, and I rewrite them and rewrite them. Like the one for Rooftoppers is on the morning of its first birthday, a baby was found floating in a cello case in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Another one is The Wolf Wilder, which is once upon a time, 100 years ago, there was a dark and stormy girl. But I think my favorite are the two first sentences of the two first chapters, which are of Impossible Creatures, which are, it was a very fine day until something tried to eat him. And it was a very fine day until somebody tried to kill her. And I loved writing that little pair.
But yeah, they are very iconic, I will say. And we've actually had a couple of questions come in, I guess maybe based on that. So both Holly Class, Robert Kett Primary and Nathan Lay's Primary School have asked, what's your favourite word to use?
Ooh, nice. Great. I love the word impossible. I love the idea that you can play with what is possible and impossible. And of course, the impossible creatures in the title of the book are both the impossible creatures, you know, the tiny dragon that can sit on the top of your thumb called a Jaculus, but also humans. Humans are impossible creatures. So I think probably my favorite words are possible and impossible.
Excellent. We have a question kind of about the book creation process from 6AG Michael Drayton Junior School, who asked, how do you go about finding an illustrator to go with your book and covers?
So this one was so lucky. This cover is by an artist called Daniel Ignaeus, and I had seen some of his work that he had done. I put together a collection called The Book of Hopes during lockdown, and a lot of writers and artists made little bits of stories and paintings and drawings for free, and Daniel had been one of them, and it was brilliant. And so when the time came to find one, I suggested that he would be brilliant, and then we looked at a couple of different possibilities, and he was the one that I chose, but it's not just me, it's also my wonderful team at Bloomsbury, and they put a huge amount of time into thinking about color and shape, and they decide things like this lovely type so that the S looks like a little snake skin, and we got fabulous wings on the A. That's all them. So I'm just very lucky to work with very brilliant artists.
Wonderful. We have a lovely question from the Pears Family School, who say, can you elaborate on the importance of fostering a love for learning in children through literature?
So I think, here's the thing. I loved books as a child. But my brother didn't particularly. He didn't really love books. He hadn't found the right book for him. And my parents worked really hard to try to find the right book for him. And in the end, the thing that got him hooked on books for the rest of his life were the Asterix comics, which he just adored. And I think it is so important to keep helping people find the book. They read a book, they don't like it, it doesn't matter. Look for the next one. No book is going to be right for the 8 billion people that live on the planet. Everybody has their own particular shape of soul, and there is a shape of book that matches that soul perfectly. And if you can find that match, then you put someone on a road where they have access to thousands of years of human jokes, human advice, human comfort, human wisdom that is the books that we have laid down in history. And so I think finding a way to put people on that road is an important one.
Wonderful. So I think we've got 2 minutes left. So we've had quite a few questions, people asking, what are you reading right now? And are there any particular authors that you draw inspiration from at the moment?
There are so many writers at the moment who I adore. I love Abby Elphinstone, and I love Piers Torday and Robin Stevens. And there's a writer writing now who, if you're looking for something very funny and sharp and witty, her name is Shana Jackson, and she writes the high-rise mystery stories. And I find those so warm and so exciting. They're sort of murder mysteries. So if you're looking for a good murder mystery, go to Shana Jackson.
Excellent. Yes, I would also second that one as well. A lovely question from class 6HK at Michael Drayton Junior School, who say, what age were you when you went on your first adventure that sparked your interest?
Wonderful. I think I was very lucky because I grew up in Zimbabwe. I was often taken on lots of different adventures. And in fact, this is a story that I tell people about how I decided to become a writer. And it is a true story. I was probably about 7 years old, and I was taken to an elephant sanctuary where elephants who had been poached were, their parents had been taken away, and so the babies were being hand raised. And a baby put its trunk on my face and touched my face, and it was the most exciting thing. And then it sneezed straight into my open mouth. And that moment was the moment I thought, I think I need to be a writer, because this is the best thing that has ever happened to me. And I need to find a way to make people see that having your face covered in elephant snot by a tiny newborn baby elephant is unlike anything else. And the way to make people know things that you've experienced, the way to share experience, is to write them down.
Wonderful. That is an incredible image as well. So one last question now from Matt in Salisbury, who asks, what books do you plan to write in the future?
So I'm currently, Impossible Creatures is going to be a series. And so I'm currently writing book 2. And I'm not allowed to say very much about it. But the one thing I am allowed to say, in Impossible Creatures, there is a character called Night Hand, who is a berserker who feels no fear. He's incapable of feeling fear. And I loved writing him because it also means that he's not afraid of insulting everyone he meets. And I thought, what if that character, but we had a girl berserker, a young woman berserker who has never felt fear? What would a girl berserker be like? And how would they move through the world? And I have loved writing her. So I'm very excited about that book, which will come out in 2025.
That is incredibly exciting. I'm also now very excited for that. Well, thank you so much, Katherine, for talking to us today. And thank you to all of the schools watching for submitting all of your excellent, excellent questions. Just a reminder that this has been recorded. So if you want to revisit any of it, you absolutely can. Your teachers will be emailed a link tomorrow. And please share pictures of you enjoying the event, as the chat has just been exploding so fast that I can barely read it. So I think we've got lots of keen readers watching. So thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you to everyone watching, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. It's been such a joy to speak to you all.
Bye.